Chinese, well, you've really disappointed me, and please do something, while our hearts are still open to you. But thank you for your very inspiring words.
Thank you. I really enjoyed hearing about Dalai Lama, but I didn't know any conclusion. If you could talk a little bit more about the idea of global citizenship and what that means to the world right now.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Well, it's good. In the book I wrote about the Dalai Lama, there's deliberately no conclusion because of the Buddhist idea of impermanence and the world is flux and everything is changing. But in terms of global community, I suppose I feel that most of us in this room are sitting on opportunities that our grandparents couldn't visualize. And that globalism, whether we like it or not, is our reality, and we have to turn that reality into a possibility. And so one reason why I've probably defined myself almost without thinking about nationalities is that I think part of the beauty of global community is that it allows us to step outside the divisions or the enmities of the past. For example, when I was growing up, if I called myself an Indian, maybe I would think of Pakistan in a not very favorable way. If I called myself British, maybe members of Britain's other former colonies would see me in a bad light, understandably. If I called myself an American in the early 1960s, perhaps I would think of Russia and other countries as part of an evil empire. And I think the beauty of not defining yourself in terms of these countries is that you're not defining yourself in terms of their hostilities. And that is something that more and more of us every day are able to do, and especially in a room like this, and especially among the younger generation, I've found that even the people who are in their 20s now are in some ways much more colorblind and religion blind than even I and my classmates were 30 years ago. And I think that's a wonderful thing. People barely seem to register often what race or what nationality or what distant ancestral home their partners come from. When I went to school in England, I was in a school with 1,250 boys, and 1,240 of them came from the same tiny section of British society. Even Catholics and Jews was so unusual. I think there were, out of 1,250, maybe 7 Jewish boys and 8 or 9 Catholics and 3 Indians. But essentially it was 1,240 boys, all from the same religion, the same section of society, the same background. When I go back to that school now, all the pictures I see are Indian, Chinese, and Russian students. Very, very quickly, even England, which seemed to me a very rigid country, very much in love with its traditions, has opened up exhilaratingly. When I was growing up, London seemed one of the more defensive and stodgy and perhaps xenophobic cities in the world. And now, one generation later, London is one of the most open, the most youthful, the most multicultural cities anywhere, where nobody thinks twice about seeing a Kenyan man with a French woman or an English man with a Jamaican woman or whatever the combination is. So I think actually the world is loosening up very quickly, and it's so easy to see the fissions and the drawbacks of all this and the ways in which even as borders have dissolved, new borders have come up. And there's something in human nature that if we're placed in a desert and all divisions are removed, we still start forming groups, and something in us wants to define ourselves with the us versus the people on the other side of the wall. So I'm not sure that will ever diminish. And we've seen in some ways more wars than ever before in this global time. So we're so aware of how nationalisms are intensifying. I suppose I've tried to look at the ways in which internationalisms can help us do things that we couldn't do before. And when I travel around the world, we're so aware of the way in which, for example, America seems to be overrunning other cultures. I've always been interested in the way in which actually other cultures, which are often older and deeper and richer than this one, with American cultures, take in everything they want from America but remain just as Japanese or Indian or Chinese as ever they were, and in fact are giving our cultures back. So I suppose I've tried to accentuate the positive because it's so easy to lose in the midst of our headlines. And I don't know if that's really an answer to your question. But I've, for example, I used to suffer through an English literature program when I was growing up. And in English literature, when I was studying it, meant basically, as you heard, George Eliot and Dickens and Trollope and Hardy. And I'm sure if I were to go into a literature class here at CSLB, it would be Michael Ondaatje and Salman Rushdie, Narendra Roy and Maxine Hong Kingston and Ben Okri and people from every corner of the globe. And it's as if this very stuffy old house of English letters and the English language has had all its doors and windows thrown open, and new spices and new smells and new stories and new ways of telling stories, new history coming into our midst and making everything much more exciting. And you couldn't find a better example of that than Los Angeles. Just as I was driving down to Long Beach today, I was remembering Los Angeles in the 60s and making the same drive here. And I think those of you who've known this city or other cities in this country for a long time know that they're so much more excitingly diverse, and there are so many other cultures. When my parents were growing up, certainly my grandparents, they never could have dreamed of meeting a Tibetan or Salvadoran or Vietnamese. And now those people are in our lives, in our beds, in our hearts, and I think the world is a much better place for it.
That concludes the formal part of our program, but Pico has very kindly agreed to sign books, so please stick around and chat with him if you want to. I'd also like to just take the opportunity to ask Mr. Solanki to please present a small token of our appreciation too.
Can we put a sign so you can...
Oh, yes.
Yes, sorry.
Let's try and put up there.
That was all time. Work very hard to have
I've actually been wanting to thank you so much for Japan.